Good evening and welcome to the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, a series of conversations with startup founders and the investors who fund them. Today I'm delighted to have with us Mark Goldenson from Breakthrough.com. And Mark, pleasure to see you here. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, you're the founder and CEO of Breakthrough.com. Can you tell us a little bit about what Breakthrough.com is and what it does?
Sure. So Breakthrough.com is a platform for online counseling. We connect people with mental health providers through secure video, phone, email, and chat. And the problem is that we're trying to solve is that 1 in 4 Americans, 58 million people, have a mental illness, depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, eating disorders. These are our parents, our siblings, our kids who have these kind of things. And even though counseling has been shown to help 90% of the time, 2/3 of people with these conditions do not get any treatment. And there are 4 major reasons for this. It's the high cost of counseling, low access, inconvenience, and stigma. And what's interesting is that we think the internet can help address all 4 of these problems. It can reduce costs anywhere between 10 to 50% because of reduced overhead. It can expand the pool of providers that people can access. It can make it a lot more convenient because you can go to counseling anywhere where there's phone or internet access. And it can reduce stigma because you can do this confidentially, even anonymously. So we're really excited to provide something that can not only do well as a business, but do good.
So how did you come to think of doing this? Because this is a little bit unusual from the usual, let me go and do an iPhone app.
Sure.
This sounds quite complex. How did you decide to go and do this?
Right. Well, it's a merging of my backgrounds in psychology and mental health and internet entrepreneurship, which I think is not unusual. I think a lot of entrepreneurs do pursue something that is close to them. For me, I had been a researcher at Stanford in the Stanford Psychology Department for 4 years. The whole reason I came out to Stanford was actually to do research on what's called lucid dreaming, which is dreaming while knowing you're dreaming. And I could go off on 2 hours of that, but I won't.
Okay.
But it's a fascinating topic.
Right.
And I just quickly decided that I am not a good researcher. You have to go deep into a topic versus go broad. But I've always been interested in it. I had counseled teens. I had counseled veterans. I was a neuroscience major. So when I went into internet entrepreneurship, and I've been doing that for about 12 years, I didn't do as much on the psychology side. So when I was looking for a new startup to do a year ago, I was interested in what is at the intersection of psychology and the web. And I think the number one answer is online telemedicine. I think for a lot of medical fields, delivery of healthcare in some form is going to be online. And what's interesting about mental health are actually 2 interesting things. One is that out of all medical fields, it is the one most suited to being delivered on the web because the primary treatment is communication between a therapist and the patient. And the second is that it is uniquely suited to reducing the stigma of mental illness because you can do it confidentially or even anonymously.
Okay. So you touched a little bit on your background as to how you got to doing this. Tell us a bit more about that because, all right, you started out doing some research in this area. Then you went off, you say, for 12 years into the internet. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so just my background?
Yeah.
So I had been interested in research for a while, and the last field that I wanted to get into was business because coming into school I thought, well, you have to be seedy and unsavory to do business, right? You have to cheat and steal and such. So I thought I wanted to live in an ivory tower, and around the dot-com boom around 1998, everyone was starting a company on campus. So a friend had seen that I had started the squash team on campus and thought, okay, maybe he has some entrepreneurial ability and he can help us on the operational side. So he had an idea for creating a online storefront for small businesses because about 50% of businesses, 60% employ all American jobs, about 60% of GDP, but very few had small business storefronts. So we tried to create that. And it was a great idea. We raised $21 million. We were a finalist in the Stanford Entrepreneurial Challenge. and we made every rookie mistake that you can possibly make. We had too many founders, we overraised money, we didn't deliver enough product. So I went back to school. I actually ended up dropping out of Stanford twice to do startups. But and the first experience was just loving that experience of creating something that can have value and that, yes, you can make money in, but is really a mission. So I went on to do co-found a marketplace for Stanford called the Stanford Bazaar, which was eventually acquired by Stanford, and then dropped out for a second time to join PayPal around 2002 as a product manager. So it was. I don't know that it was a straight linear line from where I was to what I'm doing now, but I've enjoyed kind of every step, and now I see how those early mistakes, I've learned a lot from them, and I think made me a better entrepreneur for it.
Okay. So you had the idea to start Breakthrough.com. What were some of the early steps you did? Things like, how did you find the rest of the founders? How did you build a team? How did you get it going?
Right.
Who were going to be your customers? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I have benefited a bit from that experience in knowing what I was looking for. And one thing I was looking for was to try and set a very high bar for the early team, because I do think that sets the later culture. Generally, the best people want to be around the best people. So if you get a mediocre team because they're cheap or because they're the only ones who can get or so on, then even if you excite people with your idea and any some traction later on, they generally want to work with the best people. So I spent 3 months looking for the ideal co-founders, and eventually we found a development team that had that was experienced in Ruby on Rails, which is this engineering platform that allows very rapid development. They had actually built one of our competitors before us. They were willing to accept a large part of their compensation in equity. They were generally smart guys. So that all played into the decision. And so we pushed out our beta site in 11 weeks on $50,000 in credit card debt. We had been trying to get a great domain for about 3 months and eventually did get Breakthrough.com, which has been a huge boon to us. We launched at TechCrunch 50, which is the prominent tech conference for launching startups from the TechCrunch, the major technology blog. And since then, we've been iterating the site and now have some great sales traction, usage, and things look good.
Okay, so you were a sole founder and you got a team, or did you have any other co-founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, of course, early people who are contributing. I think my case is a little unusual because I suppose I was the sole founder. That I think it is more typical to find a tech person and a salesperson or two tech people. Part of it was I was really looking for that sole co-founder, but this was around April or so of last year, and a lot of the people I think who were interested were needing a salary because it was so hard to find people could go work out the salary. So I did find some people, but I didn't think that their background was the exact fit that I was looking for. And so I found a team that I think was a good fit for what we're looking for. And I guess you could consider them early employees or early co-founders, but they've been great for us. And as is everyone else that I've been working with. Mazu Samuelson, who was a product manager from LinkedIn, fellow Stanford grad, was great for us early on, and several other people.
Okay. Now, I know you were able to raise some venture capital fairly early on. How did you go about doing that, and at what stage of the company did you decide to go and look for venture capital?
Right. So I think we could have raised a little early on, but it would have been on terrible terms. So I was more willing to go into debt for a short period, $50K, and build out the site, because what I think people, new entrepreneurs may not appreciate is that your valuation goes up dramatically early on at small steps. So if you are a guy and a gal in a garage and you have an idea and nothing else, then your valuation might be zero and might be 50,000, 100,000. If you can get out a simple alpha, then your valuation might double or triple. If you can get a beta with more features and actual users, then your valuation will double again. If you get your first sales contract, it doubles again until you're looking at $4 or $5 million valuation to invest terms on with a relatively short amount of time, 3 to 6 months. So I didn't think it made sense to go out for money, and I was willing to kind of go all in on my savings in order to make this happen. And I didn't really have a lot because I'd been an entrepreneur for a long time now. I haven't had a market salary since my days in PayPal, which is almost 10 years now. So I knew that was the better way to go, both in terms of equity, but also not having too much interference early on, really executing the vision of the early people. So once we felt like we had the right business model, then I went out to get some funding to grow the team and really invest in development. So now we have over $200,000 in funding from Charles River Ventures. Sargur has been a great partner for us there, and other top angels. And we actually have several other VC firms that have said they'll be coming in.
Okay, so take me back to what was your funding strategy? How did you figure out which VCs to approach? In fact, VCs rather than angels? Or how did you go about figuring out where you should go, when you should go to them, who you could connect to, blah, 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 blah?
Right.
What was the strategy that you worked on?
Right. Well, there's a few different criteria that we thought about. One is, what were the best partners for us? And we are at this intersection of healthcare and the web. And it is challenging to find investors that are comfortable with that intersection. Healthcare investors tend to be more focused on biotech, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, while internet investors tend to focus on consumer applications. Mm-hmm. We are a bit unique in that we have a consumer application, breakthrough.com, that people can go to find a therapist, but we also have a white label technology that we sell to mental health organizations, schools, health plans, prisons, military units, clinics, and that is actually the part of our business that is growing faster. So you need investors who are willing to invest in what might be considered more of a B2B, business-to-business mm-hmm. sales plan. So when you try and combine healthcare and internet and B2B and say which investors are interested in that, it's a smaller pool than the typical investors for, say, a mobile application or your typical online, say, marketplace. Mm. So what we did is we looked at what investors, did I know and respect? And again, I think this is where my experience has helped me to know who are the investors I think would really add value and would get this. And second, who has an experience investing in healthcare? And so we look at comparable companies, see who has funded them, and as long as there isn't any red flags around them, would talk with them about possibilities. But I think finding a good partner is pretty important. That said, I would also say I tend to believe that the primary thing that investors can add overall is the funds that help grow the company. And I think some entrepreneurs might overvalue what investors can add in terms of other non-monetary assets. And that's one thing I expected early on in my first experience, that investors would be able to add a whole ton of value beyond the money. And sometimes they can, but I wouldn't optimize my evaluation too much on that.
Right. And I know you said you ended up with Charles River Ventures. Can you tell us about how you approached them and how many other firms or angel groups you pitched along the way before you were successful in raising money? Right.
So I had known Sargur from before, and I think that is a common story of knowing your investors beforehand. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually a good one, because what I like to do is, even if I'm meeting an investor for the first time, is I prefer to lay the groundwork of the relationship. Instead of going in and saying, I want money immediately, I would say, here's what this company is about, here's what I'm about as an entrepreneur, and ideally, here's what I want to commit to you to finish in 3 to 6 months. And then I'm going to come back to you in 3 to 6 months, and then we can talk about funding. Now, not everyone can be in a situation like that to say, well, I'm going to wait 3 to 6 months fundraise, but I think that's an ideal way to do it, because it shows empathy for the investor. The investor's risk early on is typically, is this team capable of doing what they say they can?
Absolutely.
If you buy into the market, the product, the competition, which are all kind of theoretical things, but once you buy into the idea, the investor's dilemma is, do I trust this team? Is this the best team I can find to do this? And I think as an entrepreneur, what we can do is say, I'm going to prove it. I'm going to set out and commit to you, and then I'm going to prove it. So that's what I like to do. And I'd known Sar a little from before, so I think he knew my background a bit. And I was fortunate now to have some investors from my previous venture come into this one, because then, even though that venture did not do that well, I think they saw that we tried well, we executed well, and now I'm thankful that they're coming in again.
Okay. So you had the idea, you were able to find a team, particularly to help you with the website. You've got some money. How did you put together, I mean, this sounds like it, because you've got the psychology side, the website, and how did you pull together a product you could take to either the consumers or the white label users?
Right. Well, I'd love to say that I had a business plan that predicted all this a year down the road, but it wasn't like that. I did do about 2 to 3 months of research to understand why had this idea not reached fruition? Why wasn't there a leader in this field already in 2010? Because I don't think we have that significant of a technical barrier. It's a challenge to make it secure, HIPAA compliant, which are the laws around delivering healthcare information.